Pour yourself a cold one.
Let's strike 'em, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of the College Draft.
Yeah, it is Daddy Soda time here on the College Draft podcast presented by DraftKings Sportsbook, America's #1 rated sportsbook app. Did I have 3 Daddy Sodas before 11 a.m. on the chairlift Saturday morning? I might have. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, at Ross Tucker NFL on all the social media platforms. You can find all of our shows at Ross Tucker Pod. We will post them there first, and then the highlight clips there. We're always on YouTube as well, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. Awesome Ross Tucker football podcast yesterday with Alex Anzalone, the former Florida Gator, former New Orleans Saint, who is heading into free agency, making me feel real old, by the way. Just had a baby boy, going to free agency. Time flies as we get older. The star of this show, though, it's Emory Hunt, my guy. Look, he's so legit, he's got an FCS ballot. Okay, that's all you need to know. This guy's so legit. He's a legitimate voter. Check him out on Twitter at FBallGamePlan, as well as Football Game Plan on YouTube. And most importantly, okay, for the next, whatever it is, 5-6 weeks, do yourself a favor. Get the draft guide, footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide. I got it. It's awesome. Emory somehow has prospect profiles on D3 guys at schools I've never heard of. It is unbelievable. There is no other draft guide like it. 2021 draft guide, footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide. We're talking tight ends, H-backs, flex, all that stuff today, and we're doing it with one of the best in the business, Dane Brugler from The Athletic. Dane's been on the show at least once a year for, 4 or 5 years at this point. You can and should follow him on Twitter like I do, at DP Brugler. Dane, thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I know you're a little busy this time of year.
Yeah, that time of year, but this is the best time of year. We get the chance to finish up evaluations. Obviously, it's a weird year. Usually, we're coming out of the combine, ready to dive head first into pro days, and it's just different this year with the schedule. So the pro days mean more than ever, and so it's going to be a really interesting rest of the March month just to see how these workouts play out and how we finish up the process. So can't wait.
Just out of curiosity, Dane, it seems like guys always do better at their pro day than they do at the combine. Have you talked with NFL teams about how they're going to account for that when they're looking at the numbers for these guys?
Well, yeah, it's definitely something that's been the topic in scouting circles. But, I think first and foremost, what's the alternative? This is kind of the best that, we'll take what we can get at this point, unfortunately with no combine. But, the NFL's got a plan. They're breaking it up, all these pro days up into regions. And so scouts are going to different regions of these pro days. And so, they've got it down to, some type of process the best they can. But yeah, there's no question, it's just gonna be a lot different. A lot of these, the NFL wants the coaches at these pro days to run the drills. Some coaches have pushed back on that a little bit. So it's just gonna be a lot different than we're used to. And so at this point, we'll take what we can get, try to get these times, these measurements as close to accurate as possible. I think obviously some of the bigger schools will be, maybe a little more accurate. But it's a lot of teams, they use their hand times from the pro days. Anyways, their hand times from the combine more so than, the quote unquote official times. So, for some teams, it might not be too different, but, for those of us on the outside looking in, it's just going to be a different process.
All right. So now I got 2 more questions before we get into this, because my brain's going. Were scouts allowed to be on campus this season?
They were not allowed to attend practice. Now, at some programs, scouts were allowed at the game day field, but a lot of teams don't practice on their game day field, so that it was a moot point. A lot of teams, or these scouts were allowed for game days, but no contact. So basically the answer is no. They were allowed, technically they were allowed on campus, but they really weren't. They weren't allowed to have any access, and so it's just completely different than how the normal operations happen with area scouts and what their fall looks like. Talking to area scouts, they did a lot of virtual meetings on Zoom, talking to these players. And so there was some interaction, but not what they're used to. And with the pro days, it'll almost be similar. Usually, teams will arrive a day before, take a player out to dinner, or lunch the next day, whatever. This year, obviously, none of that. So it's just from the fall up into the spring. What these area scouts are allowed, their access is extremely limited compared to what they're used to.
So here, I'm asking this for a specific reason, because I'm thinking about Isaiah Wilson. Okay, the Titans draft him in the first round, Emory, and they just gave him to the Dolphins for nothing last year. And by the way, I did the SEC championship game when he was maybe a redshirt freshman. He's one of the biggest dudes I've ever seen in my life. Like, that is a big dude. And he's had all kinds of off the field issues. And I guess I wondered how much of that was because, maybe the Titans weren't able to vet him as much as they normally would. But I would think that would be even more pronounced this year, because really, since last March, they haven't been able to get in there to talk to the secretary and the janitor and the assistant strength coach and the people they try to talk to really find out about these guys, right?
Right. And it's a sad situation, because now you look at him going to probably the worst place you can go to if you got off the field question marks, right? You got Miami, Key West, Cuba, not that far away, about 90 miles south. So it's not the best place for him, but you're right. And I know it was a lot of resistance for a lot of scouts to get to games this year. So you didn't see press box, packed with scouts like you normally do. And so it's going to be tough to get that inside information. And it makes you wonder what Miami knows about this kid that Tennessee doesn't know or is just done with. What makes Miami feel like, okay, we can bring him into our program and get the best out of him. So there's a lot that you probably don't know going into a situation like that with guys. We're going to see guys that have question marks, that are going into the draft that we just won't be able to answer.
Yeah, the
Ross,
one thing I could go ahead.
Real quick, that's a great point, because Isaiah Wilson last year, when scouts were on campus, when they were allowed on campus a year ago, he was a redshirt sophomore, so they really couldn't talk to him. They really didn't have a lot of access to him. And, I'm sure they weren't even convinced he was coming out. And so, when we got to March and pro days and, when we find out more information, a lot of teams weren't able to get that. So that's a very good point. And I think this year we're going to see teams be a lot more conservative. And, it's just because of the lack of access to these guys, because teams are only allowed to have 5 Zoom calls with a player. That's it throughout the entire process. And so that's extremely limited compared to, what they're usually getting. And so for a player who maybe had a mistake or two in his past, but maybe is past that and he's, on the up and, he's kind of, reinvented himself, it's going to be tough for him because teams might choose to be a little more conservative with the guys where they know and understand the character this year.
It's a really interesting point. The one thing I would say too, Emory, to your question about Isaiah Wilson, he went to Poly Prep in Brooklyn, which is where Brian Flores, the Dolphins head coach, went. So he's supposedly known about Isaiah going back to high school. Maybe they even, they obviously know the same people. So Flores has probably talked to enough people to believe that he can get to Isaiah, whereas the Titans just gave up on him. You think about, this is a different subject, but the Titans, Vic Beasley, Jadeveon Clowney, Isaiah Wilson, the Titans are whatever they're not on a roll. Let's put it that way. Those are some big, big misses for them on multiple levels. Anyway, let's get into tight ends. I love tight ends. I think that they are more important with every passing year in the NFL. And Emory, Dane, every week has specific categories. And I like the way you did this, Emory, where you've got inline, H-back, and flex. Your number one inline guy is, Emory?
It's Pat Freirmuth out of Penn State. He's one of those throwback guys that can do it all, block, help out in the run game. He can run good routes. He gets open. He looks to score the ball after he catches it. So that's the guy you leave out on the field all 3 downs because he's the perfect tight end in this. Right now we're all focused on flex guys, right? Because that's the sexy position, guys that can run routes, bigger wide receivers. But you always want that inline guy. Those guys to me have staying power. And, Freirmuth has been one of those consistent players at Penn State since he got there. And the blocking part is key because once again, you have to be able to have that extension of the run game with your tight end. And if you're not able to do that, it kind of limits you a little bit offensively. But when you have a guy that can do it and also be a threat as a receiver, you want him on your team.
Dane, let me ask you this about Freirmuth. I remember you and I texting last year because he had that weird deal where he repeated a year at a prep school and would have been eligible last year. And there was talk that he was, a first-round type last year. I know he got hurt this year. I've seen people say second round now. I've seen some people say maybe even third. Is it just the injury or did coming back hurt him?
No, I mean, I don't think that. I think he's viewed kind of how Cole Kmet was viewed last year out of Notre Dame, where he could go first round. He could go anywhere between 20 and 45 is where I expect Pat Freirmuth to go. I don't think he's fallen to the third round. That would be a big surprise. Now, I don't think he's necessarily lived up to that baby Gronk moniker that was given to him. He's just not that type of player in terms of impact. But he is a serviceable blocker. And I think as a pass catcher, he broke Mike Gesicki's Penn State record for touchdowns by a tight end. I thought he dealt with a lot of inaccurate quarterbacks during his time. And he made them look a lot better with his ability to catch outside his frame and just be a reliable target. So, I don't know that he has Pro Bowl potential. I don't know that he's necessarily that type of talent, but he's a high floor guy. You know what you're getting with Pat Freirmuth. And so I think somewhere in the top 50, a team's going to look at him and say, okay, we're going to add him to our tight end room and our offense is going to be better.
Yeah, you guys know I watch every snap Penn State plays. He's much tougher than Gesicki was, but he's not the natural athlete that Gesicki was. Gesicki's a freak show. That's interesting. Is Freirmuth your number one inline guy, Dane, or do you have somebody else?
No, I think that, he is. I do have some questions with him as a blocker. Just, watching the Ohio State tape, watching Jonathan Cooper just drive him backwards or, I think there are areas as a blocker where he can get better just in terms of, strengthening his anchor, being a better drive blocker in the run game. He does those things well, especially for a college player where, like Emory said, we get so fixated on the flex guys or, guys that are scoring touchdowns and, winning down the seam that, we don't focus enough on the blocking. But this is a player who, did it and, he was a reliable player. Can he get better? Yes. And I think that's maybe why he's a top 50 guy and not a lock top 30 guy.
Your number one H-back type, Emory.
I was impressed with Tommy Tremble out of Notre Dame. This dude, everything he does is explosive, like blocking, running routes, ball in his hands. This is someone that has the upside because we talking about him now, but we didn't really talk about him last year. There were so many targets with Notre Dame's offense. We spent a lot of time talking about their offensive line, their run game, the receivers, that help out. But Tremble, to me, was one that fits that role perfectly. That move guy, he can, you could even trust him carrying the football, giving him a handoff or something like that. I think he's, explosive. He's athletic. He's someone that fits today's game coming from that H-back position.
What did you think of Tremble, Dane?
Loved him. And, I think he is that upside player. It's a faith based projection because, he had 35 career catches at Notre Dame, not many. And he wanted to be a defensive player, just like his dad, who had a cup of coffee in the NFL, won a Super Bowl with the Dallas Cowboys back in, I think, 95. But they moved him to tight end his junior year in high school. He's pretty productive. And then he basically missed his entire senior year with an injury. So, he was, a little bit behind the eight ball in terms of learning the position. And he goes to Notre Dame, he redshirts. And then they used him primarily as a blocker, which he embraced fully. He is a kick butt blocker with not only his power at the point of attack, but his demeanor, his tenacity. He wants to bury you in the blocking game. And so as a lead blocker, he can do it in pass pro. He doesn't have a huge sample size. He does not have the body of work that normally you want to see from a player who you're going to consider in the top 100 picks. But the upside with him is what you consider his athleticism. You consider what he can do for you in the blocking game. And then his upside as a pass catcher. Yeah, I'm a believer in Tremble. I think he's a top 100 pick, a day 2 player, and one of the top 4 or 5 tight ends in this class.
As far as your flex, Emory, I guess everybody in the Galaxy has the same number 1 flex this year. But I'll let you talk about Kyle Pitts a little bit. Florida.
I've said this, to use New Orleans term, beaucoup times, right? It's the fact that this dude he's the quintessential threat. And if you like him at tight end, he's kind of Randy McMichael-like. I think Randy McMichael was excellent when he came out of Georgia and just played in a different era. But if you want him at wide receiver, which a lot of people want to move him to, he's Plexico Burress. Same type of athleticism, same type of movement. And I like how he's able to play big when you need him to play big. And you see some guys that are tall that tend to play small. And so for him, he understands his size. He understands his advantages. He's playing with that. He could win on the outside with routes. He could win on the inside with size. And the effort is there in blocking, and that's something that I would rather see. Especially as a running back, you want to see at least the dude giving effort. Like if you're going to get blown up, at least put up a fight. But at least he's out there wanting to block and wanting to improve in that area. You probably don't want him to do that a lot, but at least he's not going to, wilt and punk out in that situation. But as a receiver, man, he's a day 1 red zone target, day 1, 50-50 ball guy, above the rim guy. That's Pitts all day.
All right, so listen to this, guys. This is my Kyle Pitts nugget, okay? I called all of his state championship games at Archbishop Wood High School in suburban Philly, and they never threw the ball. They almost never throw the ball. He was an inline tight end and D end. I think he transferred there.
Yep.
I want to say his sophomore or junior year. Junior year, okay? I'm telling you, they have a huge O-line always. They get up on the ball, as much of the ball as they can get, tight splits, and they run power every play. He led them in receiving as a senior with 300 yards and 5 touchdowns. I actually thought he was going to go to Florida and play defensive end. I mean, he was much more impactful in those 2 state championship games on defense than he was on offense. And I wanted to ask you, Dane, I don't study these guys. I watch the TV copy when I'm watching a Florida game, and I am amazed at what he's done as a receiver. He only ran 2 routes at Archbishop Wood. They had a waggle, and then they had a pop pass. It's crazy when I see these highlight clips you guys post of him that he's this good of a receiver, number 1. And number 2, I would think he'd actually be a really good blocker because that's all he did in high school. I mean, they ran power to the strong side. And so I guess I'll start with that, Dane. What kind of blocker is Kyle?
Yeah, and it was great going back to his high school stuff because I do that with every player. Go back to the high school stuff, go to huddle, and just to get a sense of who they were to better understand who they are now. And yeah, I mean, that matches based off of the research I did. Just really fascinating. I think you're right. At 321 yards senior year, 5 touchdowns. And the way he was used, he was asked to be in line at times. And so we did get a chance to see him blocking. And this is why I don't understand the move him to wide receiver conversation, because you can line him up in line and he will give you effort. He can execute basic blocks. Is he going to be a sustain guy? Is he going to be a drive block guy? No, not necessarily. But that's not really how you want to be using him either. So he can execute basic blocks. You can keep him in line. You don't have to hide him. And then even as a pass catcher, like you said, that was his dream. He wanted to be Eric Burrow. He wanted to be Jericho. But the coaches at Abington didn't let him. And so he transfers to Archbishop Wood, and here's your wish. We're going to put you to tight end. And, he got what he wanted, but he was more of a blocker. He goes to Florida, and, his first year, he didn't do anything as a freshman, 3 catches. And then last year as a sophomore, he blew up. He had 54 catches, 5 touchdowns. And watching his sophomore tape, coming into the year, I had him at number 11 overall on my August draft board. So I loved him, but he was so inconsistent. He had, I think, 6 drops. His routes were all over the place. This year, he looks completely like just a much more polished player. It's really, really fascinating to watch him, just his maturation over the last year. And last year, based off last year's tape, he was a number 11 player. So this year, he's one of the top 3 players in this draft. It's like a Quentin Nelson situation. When you talk about a position that you don't normally draft top 5, top 7, talking about the guard coming out of Notre Dame, but in the right situation where you're not going to regret drafting this player because of the impact he can make for your team. The Florida coaches call him a unicorn. I think that's the best way to describe him. He's so different with his ball skills, his size. I like the Plexico Burress comparison. I've been using that one as well. Just a really, really intriguing player. It's going to be a playmaker as soon as his rookie season.
That is really interesting on a lot of those. I was going to ask you, Dane, my follow-up question, which I don't need now, was going to be how high is too high? I saw somebody the other day, it might have been Daniel Jeremiah, said if you had to pick one guy from this year's draft that's going to go to the Hall of Fame, if you had to predict one guy from this year's draft to go to the Hall of Fame, it would be Kyle Pitts. Speaking of the Hall of Fame, get Hall of Fame hair, or at least keep Hall of Fame hair. Look, Emory's got great hair. Dane's got great hair. I do not. That's why I take keeps, because I'm trying to actually keep my hair. Look, you can see the bald spot kind of on YouTube if I lean down long enough. 2 out of 3 men will experience some form of hair loss by the time they're 35. More than 50 million men in the U.S. suffer from male pattern baldness. Look, here's the deal, okay? There's only 2 FDA-approved medications that can prevent hair loss. I was already taking those before I found out about Keeps. With Keeps, now I don't have to go to the doctor to get the prescription. You just do it online. And I don't have to go buy the topical stuff that I put on the top of my head, my bald spot, mainly for TV. I don't really care, but I don't want to, whatever. Anyway, here's the bottom line. If you're ready to take action and prevent hair loss, go to keeps.com/draft to receive your first month of treatment for free. That's keeps.com/draft to get your first month free. keeps.com/draft. Boom. All right. Let's get it. These are what I call, Dane, the Emory categories. Nobody loves small school under the radar guys more than Emory. Who's the most underrated guy you got, Emory?
I think Briley Moore from Kansas State is underrated. He plays a lot like Trey Burton. Watching Kansas State, they got a lot of good football players. A.J. Parker at corner. You look at their young running back Deuce Vaughn, and even the running back Trotter. Harry Trotter was a pretty solid player for them. The stats may not say that, but the dude's skill set does. And Briley Moore was another one of those players where you're watching him, you're like, man, he's doing a lot of things rather well. And to me, he's an ideal H-back as well. He could block, he can catch. He's maybe not as athletic, but he does enough in that department to where you can trust him in your passing game. So I just like his game. I think he's one of those underrated prospects in this group.
Who's the most underrated guy in the tight end category for you, Dane?
Briley Moore's a good one. Because Northern Iowa transfer who, he day H-back. He can line up in line, you can line up on the wing, you can line up in the backfield. Smooth, flexible pass catcher. There's a lot of things you can do with him. He's got the toughness where he's going to help you out as a blocker. So there's a lot there. One of the underrated guys I like is Matt Bushman out of BYU. He didn't play this year. I believe it was an Achilles. But he was Zach Wilson's favorite target a year ago. He doesn't drop the football. One of the more reliable tight ends out there. So if he were able to be healthy this year, he would have been at the Senior Bowl. We'd be talking a lot more about Matt Bushman, but he's working his way back from injury. Probably going to be a late round player. He's got some NFL connections. Chad Lewis is his father-in-law, former Eagles tight end. So Matt Bushman's a name that has kind of been pushed to the back burner, but he's a good player.
Small school standout, Emory.
Listen, this dude, Zach Davidson, was hilarious to watch on film because first of all, he looks like one of the tallest dudes out there every time. It's like he stands out. How on Huddle sometimes they have the spotlight. He didn't need that because he was always the tallest dude out there. It's like, okay, that's Zach Davidson. But he has tremendous athleticism. He's a catch and run guy, flex type guy. But what was great about him, he was dominant, at Central Missouri, but also went out there and had good workouts at the College Gridiron Showcase or whatnot. But this dude also led the team in punting, led the conference in punt. He was averaging 42.8 yards a punt. That's nuts. He was outstanding. So you get a dude that's 6'7", 245 that can also help you out as a punter. And the 245 is probably a little bit more liberal than what he actually weighs, but you get him into a pro program with pro strength and conditioning, with pro nutrition. We used to call that 3 hots in the cot. You get that when you get to a higher level. He'll fill out his frame, but he has some athletic skills that really can be intriguing to an NFL team. Plus, again, he could punt the heck out of the football. And these are not, he punts 1 or 2 times a game. No, he was their punter and was booming junk all the way down the field.
Dude, I love that. Dane, can he save a roster spot? He's not that good of a punter, is he?
He might be, because he was a punter only in high school. As a junior, he only punted. He didn't even practice with the tight end group. He was a punter only, and then he had a really good basketball season that year. And so but he was thinking about only playing basketball, and the football coaches were like, "All right, you're kind of blossoming. You're coming into your body. Come back to the football team. We'll try you at tight end." And it kind of blossomed from there. It kind of took off. So this is a guy that wasn't a big football player. He was more basketball. He was a punter only, and he's still learning. He's still growing. I think that's he really fits as that prototypical small school guy that's got a lot of ability. Who you might have something there.
Lastly, let's get to your sleeper, Emory. Just so you know, Dane, I know you know Emory, but if he could, the whole show would just be Emory's sleepers. Emory's going to ditch me at some point from the college draft to start a show that's called Emory's Sleepers because he's got 7 guys listed here in the sleeper category. Just give me 1 sentence on 2 or 3, Emory. He loves to have these guys that nobody's ever heard of from school, like Kevonta Moses, Shaw University. You're just making that up. That's not a real person.
Definitely a real person. I actually been there before and have an interview with their head coach, Adrian Jones. Fantastic dude. I had a good time talking with him when I was down there in Raleigh, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago. But what's interesting about him is that, this dude, when you watch him on film, you're like, all right, this dude, maybe not, explosive, but damn, he catches everything. Legitimately is a, bad pass eraser. Every pass thrown his way is an accurate pass because he has a great wingspan and is able to catch the football really well, and also had a really good game at the Hula Bowl. So he had a Hula Bowl invite and was outstanding there. And Josh Peterson, I texted you, Ross, and was like, man, he actually is in the draft. And I have to go down to Louisiana to find, good prospects every week. Every episode we talk, somebody's from Louisiana getting into the show. But Peterson was one that's well known. obviously his dad is Doug Peterson, but Peterson was excellent for UL Monroe. This year was kind of a fluke, both him and Josh Johnson. Didn't really have the fantastic years, but Peterson is a typical flex guy that can run, catch. He has nuance within his route running. I'm excited to see how he plays and performs, but I was shocked to see him quietly announce that he was going into the draft because he already publicly announced that he was coming back.
Got it. All right, Dane, give me one either small school guy or sleeper.
Yeah, I think Pro Wells from TCU. He's a guy that isn't talked about a ton, but he led TCU in receiving touchdowns the last 2 years. A former basketball player, moved to tight end as a senior in high school, and went to the JUCO level, goes to TCU, and they don't use their tight ends a lot in that offense, but when they gave him his opportunities, he made plays. And so I think there's more there than meets the eye. And so a late round pick, maybe a PFA, we'll see if he gets drafted or not. But once you get him into camp, I think there might be more than what we've seen on tape.
All right, so here's what everybody needs to do now, okay? First of all, get the DraftKings app on your phone or the DraftKings Sportsbook app and throw the code Ross in there. Secondly, make sure you go to footballgameplan.com/2021 draft guide to get Emory's draft guide. It's already available, ready. It's awesome. You got to follow him on Twitter at FBallGamePlan and follow Dane at DP Brugler. Dane's stuff is awesome. Dane, as soon as you tweet your position rankings, I click on it immediately and read it. I got to tell you, by the way, I'm going to marry these two things right now. I talk like Even Money podcast today. It's the betting podcast. If you look at Dane's rankings and then you look at some of the prop bets that are available on DraftKings Sportsbook, like I really like Dane Rashawn Slater as the first O lineman off the board. I don't know if it happens or not, but Penn Sewell's like minus 1,000. Rashawn Slater's like plus 600 money. And I just think there might be somebody that's like, look, this kid's just good. Like you think that, would you say it's a toss-up, Dane, or no?
I don't think. I mean, Penn Sewell, for his age, his ability, his upside, I'd be shocked if he's not the first offensive lineman drafted. That's just me. But
because I've read some people that say that they think Slater could go ahead of him.
Yeah, you don't never rule anything out when it comes to the draft. All it takes is one team to believe in. Because Slater's a really good player. He can play. A lot of teams think he has 5 position versatility. There's a lot you could do with Rashawn Slater. He's a good player. I'm a big fan, but I don't know. Sewell's just so different. I think this. If there's a Chase Young in this draft in terms of being that a premier non-quarterback prospect, I think it's him.
Good timing, because we're probably going to get into offensive line next week. But like I said, follow Dane on Twitter. Subscribe to The Athletic so you can get his rankings, and then The Beast, which will come out later. Obviously, Dane's a stud. Dane's bringing up – name another podcast, okay, where Emory talks about the guy's a punter, and then Dane knows that the guy was a punter only as a junior and he played basketball. There is no other podcast. There's probably nobody else in the galaxy other than these two guys that know all these things. That's why the College Draft Podcast is the best. Check out the Even Money Podcast later today. We'll have Andrew Brandt tomorrow on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast to talk the Dak contract and more. Other than that, the keg is kicked. We are all tapped out.
Thanks for listening to the College Draft Podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, Even Money, and The Business of Sports. All availavailable at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.